I had a client who was an insurance agent, dog groomer, a college professor that had developed, he had invented something to help identify alcohol fetal syndrome early on in pregnancy. I had all sorts of clients, and it really was just helping them get out of their head, make decisions, stay focused, take the right.
Hello, Empower Nation. Welcome to Empower Her Money podcast. I'm your host, Angela Duncan. Today's episode, I get to interview Megan Huber. She is an incredible coach. She is an international speaker, has her own podcast, Built to Last, an incredible Facebook group as well. Today, she's going to be talking to our entrepreneurs about how the singularity focus is so important. She's going to be giving you some incredible tips that you will be able to implement into your business right away. Check out this episode. Hi, Megan. Welcome to Empower Her Money podcast.
Well, thank you, Angela. I'm excited to be here.
I'm excited for you too. We had a chance to chat recently. You're doing a lot of amazing things. And so before we get started on that, though, I would love for you to kind of start with your story, back up. How did you get started in the space you're at right now?
Yeah, I love this question because I really love hearing about people's come up stories and their journeys. I think we can see ourselves in little facets of other people's journeys. So yeah, I went to college to be I didn't know what I was going to do, but I ended up with a business degree, a very general business degree. And I graduated, I moved home. This will all make sense in a minute. Moved home like so many college students did, and I did not have a clue what I wanted to do. It's like, what am I going to do with a business degree? You could go do anything, right? And I didn't like all the choices, I guess. And so my mom said to me that summer, she goes, Megan, why don't you just go back to school, get a master's degree in teaching, and go be a teacher because you would be really good at it. My mom was a career teacher. So she was a high school teacher. She was an elementary school principal. And I thought, you know what? Mom's right. So my parents sent me back to school, and I mostly did online learning. I was living at their house, and I became a teacher in the business department at the high school I graduated from. My mom was my next door neighbor. We taught beside each other. And I share this because so much of how I learn how to do what I do as a coach and even leading teams, I really learned how to do that in the classroom working with high school kids. Because when you are communicating with 14 to 18-year-olds, you learn how to communicate in a certain way. And that translates very nicely to adults, whether they are your clients or they are your adult team that you are leading. So I was a teacher for 5 years, and my husband, Sean, and I had a daughter in 2010, and I did not go back to the classroom. I did not enjoy being home with a baby either, because I felt like I wasn't leading, contributing, creating, innovating. And I was very bored. I did not like it. And my husband suggested I go get a coaching certification just to work on my own personal development. So I took a certification program. I loved it. And I thought, wow, this is actually really similar to the way I communicated with my high school kids. So, and I was also a tennis coach too. And I thought, oh my gosh, like I'm a smart cookie. I have drive. I can go start a business. And I got done with that certification program. It was 5 months, and I was rocking and rolling in my business within 2 weeks of ending that certification program. So that's how I got started.
Awesome. Two things that I loved about that story. One, my daughter's about to finish her senior year in college. And I think she's kind of at that point where she's like, what am I supposed to do with my life now that school's over? So I understand that, and I'm working through and allowing, her to figure that out. So I love that. The second part of what I heard from your story is you had two important people in your life that knew you well enough to make a recommendation. So while, you didn't stay as a teacher, your mom recommending you to be a teacher, you just tied in how that helps you and today in what you're doing as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's important that we know who to be listening to in our lives, and that's not everybody. Sometimes sometimes my mom doesn't always have the best advice, but I think it's important that we know who knows us really well and can guide us. And I had two great people in my life, And the teaching skills have transferred very well for me in business too. And not just the teaching skills, but when you're a teacher, you also have to know how to manage and lead and I was known for classroom management. So all the teachers in the building, and look, I was in my 20s. I mean, I was 22 to 27 when I was a teacher. I was young. The teachers who had a student teacher from the local college, it was UNC Chapel Hill, they would have them come sit in my classroom and observe my classroom management skills. That's what I was known for in the building as a very young teacher. And a lot of young teachers, if you've ever had a young teacher in their 20s, usually they don't have good classroom management. And usually the approach they take is they're very mean to their students and they yell a lot because they think that's what's going to get them to pay attention and do what they're supposed to do. And it's the complete opposite. So it's interesting that you point that stuff out because I think it's those of us who are growing businesses, and I think a lot of your listeners are, not all of us started out that way, but we can take so many of the skills we learned in previous careers and experiences and apply it to what we're doing today.
Yeah. Do you think you attribute part of that to recognizing personalities and being able to speak to different personalities in a manner in which they're going to listen to you? Because, I mean, talking to a teenager is not an easy task at all. And being so young, I'm sure people probably mistaken you as being a student in your own class as well. Talk about like the personality profile of why you feel like some of that success happened for you early on.
Yeah, that's a really good point because as business owners, we are working with people. You are working with your clients. And if you have a team, you are working with your team. And, I'd say probably like the greatest skill for us as business owners, one of the greatest, it's communication because that's really going to drive everything. And no two team members are the same. No two clients are the same. And I really learned how to do this. I don't feel like I learned how to do this in like myself as a student in the classroom, getting a master's degree. Obviously, we took psychology classes. We did those things. But yeah, when you're working with 14 to 18-year-olds, and I taught an elective. So it's not like I was teaching honors English, honors English 12, where everybody's a 12th grader, everybody's the smartest kid in the school, and everybody like chose to take an honors or an AP class. Like I didn't have that. I taught an elective. That's a different ballgame. I had 14 to 18-year-olds, 9th grade through 12th grade. Some of my kids were even older than 18 because you can stay in school till you're 21, actually, then they kick you out. Then in the public school system, you're dealing with, yes, all the different personalities, but you're also dealing with learning disabilities of all kinds. You're dealing with a whole lot of emotions at that age. You are dealing with kids who came from like a very wide variety of household situations. You're dealing with kids who like probably didn't eat breakfast. 50% of your kids didn't have breakfast that morning, and they're not going to get a hot meal when they go home. You're dealing with kids that are witnessing domestic violence. Parents are going through a divorce, like you name it, everything. Then you're dealing with the kids who like just broke up with their girlfriend on the way down the hall, So I learned here's how I'll tell everybody my secret. I would stand at the doorway of my classroom, and my classroom was at the end of a hall. So I could see all the way down the hall. So I would stand outside my front door and I would watch my students walk down the hall, and I would observe how they interacted with other people. So I would observe their eyes, their body language, and how they would interact with somebody else in the hallway. And that told me a lot. And then as they walked by me, I would want them to make eye contact with me and have some kind of very, 1, 2, 3 second interaction with me. And it's very telling how someone interacts with you. Do they look you in the eyes? Do they pick their head up? Do they shake your hand? Do they greet you? Do they want to hug you? You just kind of have to assess that very, very quickly on the fly. And in a classroom of kids, if you can't settle your kids down in like less than 60 seconds and be able to kind of like scan the room and figure out like, who's my mischievous one? Who's the one who's a class clown? Who's going to test me? Who's the quiet one? Who's the one who just wants to sleep? Who do I need to make a leader? And you'd have to figure that out. Like, how do I figure out how to get the most and the best out of like the best them? Because not everybody was going to get an A. Not everybody was going to like pass the test. Like I knew that, but how could I get them to be the best they could be? And how could I get them to feel good about themselves in my classroom? And I'm telling everybody listening, like there's no different in dealing with adults than it is with teenagers because they're practically an adult. But that's how I learned how to do it. And you're exactly right. You've got to be able to assess visually, listening, and just watching how the person is interacting with you and with others, and then learn how to communicate and guide and lead that person in the way they need to be led and guided.
Now, when you started becoming a coach, I think it's during a time period when being a coach was not as popular, right? Today, there's coaches all over the place, all different types of coaches. But when you got into that field, it probably wasn't as saturated as it was today. So in that early stages, how did you figure out like what niche or who are you going to coach? How do you figure that out early on in your coaching career?
Yes, such a good question. When I first started, if I remember what I did correctly, I think what I did first is I identified what I could talk about to a group of people. So I built my business through in-person networking, the first business that was in early 2012. Because again, it was 2012. I lived in rural North Carolina. And for me to find a networking group, I would have to drive at least 30 minutes. So I finally started one in the town I lived in that was like 3,000 people. So I was like, well, what can I, and here's the other thing I identified. At networking groups, I also figured out very quickly, the only person making money is a person speaking at the front of the room. So I had to decide, what can I speak about at the front of the room? And look, at the time, I'm pretty sure I was talking about, because I remember some of these talks, how to cast your vision, how to set goals, how to stay focused on your goals, decision making, how to stay productive, how to be efficient and effective. And they, it was all business owners. It was very much that. And that people would hire me. And it was a lot of people who had local brick and mortar businesses. I had a client who was an insurance agent, dog groomer, a college professor that had developed, he had invented something to help identify alcohol fetal syndrome early on in pregnancy. I had all sorts of clients, and it really was just helping them get out of their head, make decisions, stay focused, take the right action that was productive and produce the results that they wanted. So that's how I figured out my first niche. And then I started like niching it a little bit more. I think my second niche, this was probably in like 2013. I started my own in-person meetup group, and it was women who were moms, and they had left whatever career they had when they had kids, but they had some kind of at-home business. Whether it was network marketing or coaching or graphic design, it didn't matter. That was my second niche. And then I think my third niche, I started getting into helping people build, take whatever they were doing and turn it into an online course. And that was all back in like the early days. Yeah.
Yeah. One of the key takeaways that I heard from that one is, a lot of people spend so much time going to networking events. I was very guilty of that. I thought the more people I meet, the better my business would grow. But a key thing that you figured out early on is speaking at those events. And that helps for you to be the expert, the authority. And now you get a chance to network afterwards with the attendees, but they're already looking to you because you were the expert, because someone chose you to be on stage, right? I think that's true probably in today's world with podcasting too. If someone is on a podcast, they're seeing a little bit more of the expert in their field, which helps build that trust early on when you're doing that networking. So I love that key point too. Now, you've also mentioned that early on of your coaching and consulting business kind of changed over the years. What happened during COVID? How does that change a coaching world? Because we had to really adjust and go through so much during that time period. How did you adjust?
Oh gosh, that's really good. So at that time in 2020, I was running group coaching programs, and I had a mastermind, and I was specifically helping coaches transition from one-on-one into offering group programs. So I would teach them how to create the group, launch it, fill it, and then deliver it at a really high level. And I remember 2020, I think those of us who were in leadership positions, it was like you had to step your leadership game up like 100 notches because your clients were really, none of us knew what was happening. None of us knew what the outcome was going to be. It was like just going into the unknown. So it was a lot of that. It was a lot of just stepping it up and almost being a stronger foundation and a stronger rock for people. And if I'm being really honest, that also took a pretty heavy toll on me. So, I was talking to a coach at the time that I was working with about this because, I got to a point where I wanted to shut it all down. And she said, you've got to remember, so many of us who've been business coaching, because I've always been in the business coaching category, we have been tasked with doing a lot of mental health coaching that we are not trained to do and we never intended to do. And that is very, very heavy. When you are here to coach people and consult people specifically on business, and you aren't necessarily as equipped as a psychotherapist or a therapist or a mindset coach or whatever, I don't have certifications in that. It really, really does take a toll. So I don't know that I made any like really drastic changes in my business or necessarily approached it in a completely different way at that time. It was more about stepping up the leadership and continuing to be a consistent, constant, steady rock for people, for the clients, and then just recognizing, and I did not recognize this at the time. The conversation I had with that coach I mentioned didn't happen until 2022, when I realized I'm burned out and I am frustrated and I'm kind of at my wit's end because I've been having to deal with other, like so many mental health problems that came up very naturally in sessions.
Gotcha. I was talking to my daughter over the weekend, and you're touching on the mental health subject. Her world is very different today than when I was in college. Most classes are online. They can work virtually. So we were talking about the anxiety, the depression, the suicide rate with younger people, especially as we have transitioned to this virtual world. In your business today, do you see that with some of the people that you're coaching? And do you do more in-person events today than perhaps you would have a couple years ago?
Well, I'm hosting a meetup on Friday. So that's at the time of this recording. So I love the in-person. I really do. In all the programs I've ever run, I've always had in-person elements to it. Because I think people, despite how much we want to see results like overnight or instant gratification or have access to what we want to have access to immediately, and for AI to get all the answers for us so we don't have to think, I still believe that we are a population of people largely who are craving connection and belonging in person. And I think for not, obviously not every single human being, I can't speak for everybody, but a lot of us, there's just a different energy when you're in the room with someone. You can only do so much on Zoom. I'll take it back to my classroom days. That whole example I gave about how I could assess kids by standing at my front door and watching them walk down the hallway. You can't do that on Zoom. I can't do that on Zoom. I can't watch how my students enter my classroom, how they treat the other 25 people in the room. I can't, I would sit there and watch their behavior. Again, like you can figure it out so fast, how you need to redirect someone when you're physically in the room with them. It's so powerful. And on Zoom, I'm just looking at somebody like sit and stare at me while they're sitting at their desk. Like you can't, it's really, really hard to assess people when you're looking at them through Zoom. And I think it's also hard for participants in a program to build a really strong connection with each other when we're just on Zoom. So I love the in-person. I was actually supposed to hold an event in 2020, and that got in person. That got moved to 2021. I did it a year later in September of 2021. And I also do a lot of consulting work, and quite a bit of that is in person. I'm heading out at the time of this recording tomorrow to drive down to Palm Beach, Florida for one of my clients' in-person events that she's hosting there. So yeah, I think that people are craving it. People are wanting it. And here's what I'll say that's changed in the event game. Not completely, but I do see people wanting more like smaller, more intimate sized events versus pre 2020. What was so popular? It was like 2 to 3,000 people in a room.
Right.
And you're just sitting like classroom style while somebody's like rocking it on stage, jumping around stage to get people hyped up. Like I went to all the Brendan Burchard things. I love that guy. I mean, I went to probably like 5 or 6 years in a row. But I think people are really looking for intimacy and connection, personalization and individualization and customization when they're investing in things nowadays.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. And I know you've got your event coming up, and I'm sure there's going to be lots of other events in your future as well. So congratulations on that.
Thanks.
All
Yeah.
right. So one final tip. Most of my audience are female entrepreneurs, either in the startup to the mid-range in their business. From a coaching perspective, because you do a lot of coaching to business owners as well. Going into 2025, where we're at today, thank God we just, finished our election and we can get off that topic for the most part. What's some advice for you for business owners going into the next year?
Oh, goodness. I love advice and teaching principles that never go out of style, no matter what's going on in the economy or with technology or the year that we are in. And I just love really, I mean, it's how I run my life. It's how I run my businesses. It's like, what do we know that's tried and true that has been around for thousands of years and it's not going to change? Like it just isn't. And I think one of the biggest things for any entrepreneur at any level, especially those who are in like, startup early phase, trying to get to 1 million. So, we're at whatever level you're at, you're not there yet. There's two things. Number one, because you brought up like, there's way more coaches in the space now than there were when I got my start in 2011. So my first tip is singularity of focus. And what I mean by that is focus on serving one client and one client only. Focus on solving one problem for them. What is the one main problem that you can help solve for someone? And I'll give an example. I work with coaches. The number one problem that I see across the board that I can help with is they don't get clients consistently enough. Their big problem they're trying to solve every single day of their lives is how do I get clients more consistently? Are there plenty of other problems that they have? Yes, we're human. We all have lots of problems. But you've got to pick the one. And the mistake I see a lot of people making is they either choose the 40,000 foot in the air problem to solve, which nobody's going to pay for because they don't understand what you mean when you say, oh, I'm just going to help you reach your goals, dreams, and desires. No, nobody knows what that means. Or we're out talking about the 88 problems we solve once somebody's in a paying relationship with us, right? Like we're actually getting to talk to them all the time and all the problems start to be revealed, right? So that's part of the singularity of focus. Then the other thing is, what's the one main result you are helping people achieve? And through what method are you helping them? You put those things together, that's all you talk about in every single shred of content that you ever put out. Every post, every blog post, every talk, every podcast guesting opportunity, every video, everything is just about that one thing. And you talk about it as if nobody who saw it yesterday really saw it yesterday and everybody has amnesia and you've got to like start all over with that message again tomorrow. Singularity of focus across the board. What that's going to do is help you stand out in a sea of a lot of coaches who are all running around saying the same thing. That sounds very general and I don't know what you do. The second part is take very consistent, messy, imperfect action every single day of the work week. That is, along with singularity of focus, I would say lack of consistency is the biggest thing that's taking people out of the game, right? Like you'll have a really good run for a few weeks or a few months, but then all of a sudden you stop seeing the results, or maybe you never really saw the results that you wanted to see. And then you get in your head and you say all these things to yourself, like, I'm not good enough. You second guess yourself, you question yourself, and then you start talking about something else now. And I call it like it's like you keep starting over. Like you start and then you go and then you start all over again, and you go and then you start all over again. And you've got to be consistent. I think what so many people are doing is they're trying to figure out all the right answers before they move forward. And it's like, no, nobody cares If you don't have it perfect, nobody's really paying attention. And the only way you're going to figure out how to make it better, how to get people to say yes to it more often, the only way you're going to figure out how to structure your sales call in a way that's going to have people say yes or no instead of I need to think about it is by doing it. Like you've got to put in the reps. I would say only about 20 to 40% of anything any of us are doing is actually working anyway. Even the people who are at the top of their game, more than half the stuff any of us do, it's not going to work. But you've got to be okay with that. So those are like the two biggest pieces of mentality, I would say, we've got to have going into 2025. And like you kind of have to be like a bulldog about that, right? Like you got to have like healthy hustle around that. Because success likes speed. We've got to be speedy and consistent.
Yeah. And I agree with that. And I think what comes to mind too is brand confusion. Sometimes I'll look at someone's Instagram, and I'm guilty of this too. Oftentimes is like you look at their profile and you see them talking about different things. And then I don't know what I'm supposed to refer business to you. I don't know what you're an expert on because you're talking about too many different topics. So the singularity on that, I think is great advice. So I appreciate that. Megan, if
Yeah.
our audience wants to get in touch with you, learn more about what you're doing, or in the Tampa Bay area and want to go to your events, how do they reach you?
Yes, I would say the two best places are my podcast, number one. The name of that show is Built to Last with Megan Huber. And the second place is my Facebook group. So kind of all roads point to my Facebook group. That's where a lot of the magic happens, where you get a whole lot of like really awesome resources. And the name of that is Structured Freedom Inc. Client Acquisition for High Ticket Coaches. And yeah, I live in the Tampa Bay area, and I am just now starting. I've been here 9 years, Angela, and I am just now starting to host at least a monthly in-person meetup where entrepreneurs can come and gather. I'm calling it a mixer mind. So
good play on words.
be on the lookout for that.
Yeah, and I'm in Miami, not too far, so I definitely be heading up for one of your events soon.
Awesome.
Awesome. Thank you so much for being on the show today.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Empower Her Money podcast. I am grateful for you. Please make sure to leave us a 5-star review, like this podcast, share it, subscribe, and let's keep teaching others how to take control and be empowered with their finances.